Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tru-Turf Super Series. In this episode, I'd like to welcome Dr. John Dempsey, all the way from Ireland. John, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure indeed. Getting me up this hour of the morning, just so.
Yes, I'm glad I've got you up. It's just gone 9 a.m. in Ireland, and it's just gone 6 p.m. over here on the east coast of Australia. So perfect timing, I would say. And I think we just agreed that it's raining at both sides of the world.
Raining both sides, yes, but that's nothing unusual here, of course, even though it is summer.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, it's a typical summer out that way. You got to have some rain up in that part of the world in summer, that's for sure. So
that's why we're so green.
Correct. The Emerald Isle, that's for sure. And we've also done pretty well in the Olympics recently. So
very well, yes.
Yeah, good to hear. Good to hear. Now, John, thank you very much, as I said, for joining us. And this came off the back of just a recent conversation I had with Dr. Tom Nicolai, another doctor in turf, who's been a great supporter of ours over many years. But we've certainly been exploring about the sustainability angle of turf and how we, from a Tru-Turf perspective, can add value to that in rolling. And certainly you have now migrated into from a turf researcher, I suppose, if we call you along those lines. You've got a PhD in not too long ago, but been at it for quite a while. But I suppose looking back to... Sorry?
How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, exactly right. So, but looking back, I suppose you're coming to this with a great background with 30 plus years of being a golf course superintendent, working on the course, and that all has predominantly been around Royal Curragh Golf Club, which is not too far from where you are now. So I suppose, tell us what got you interested in turf in the first place.
Well, I got interested in golf course management basically because I had no job. And my wife's father, my father-in-law, was a greenkeeper at the Royal Curragh. You're going back to the 1960s, so he started there. So back in the 80s, there was a recession here, and I needed a job, especially, as I was married to his daughter. So he got me working on the golf course since the mid 80s. And immediately I loved life. Now I knew nothing about turfgrass management then. Even now, I'm still learning, of course. But back in the 80s, I got in there, and I can remember walking on the green for the first time. And I thought, oh, Lord, this is really nice and soft and springy. It's like walking on a mattress. And they had a load of thatch. Now, that was down to the advice they were given. For those in the know, the greens there at that time were being fed with something like 450 kgs of nitrogen per year. They had no aeration equipment, certainly no rollers. The rollers weren't even around in them days, but no aeration equipment. They were told to top dress with pure soil, which is basically clay. And in Ireland's climate, it was a pure factory for producing thatch and that. So, but anyway, that was the very start of it. So things progressed, and we got into, we started looking into the education part of it and learning things, and we started changing our processes, we reduced our inputs, did a lot of aerating, started top dressing with sand. So right through the 90s, things were improving worldwide as well. And actually, I did a talk, and I was invited to the Czech Republic a few years ago to do some talks. And one of them said, now, I want basically a journey from a greenkeeper to scientist. But in the translation that came through, it was from grass cutter to turfgrass solicitor or something. Something ridiculous. But that
always was lost in the translation.
Yeah. So, but that was basically looking back over a few years from the 80s right up to the present thing, how things changed. And I remember doing, as part of that, I did a sort of a survey on Twitter. I asked people, what, in your business or your career, what changes, what's the biggest changes you've seen? And you could tell by the age of the person, the greenkeeper. Guys like me were saying things like verti drains and spinning disc top dressers, where you give up using the shovel. And the younger guys coming through, things like robot mowers and GPS sprayers, rollers, of course, was there.
Yep. So
we sort of looked at how things changed, and they have changed immensely since the 1980s. We're much more of a scientific approach to it. And so I got interested in education. I left school early, actually. and I think it was about 15, no qualifications and then I got married early. We had kids, so to buy a house, so we had no time to get into education. So it wasn't until I started doing certificate courses here in Dublin as part of the first area of greenkeeping education. I loved doing that. And then in the 2000s, online degrees and that became available in the UK. So I was able to go through with that, and I really enjoyed that. Still, obviously working as superintendent. And the one of the things, the final year of the degree program, you had to carry out a research program, and this was the mid 2000s, and I did mine. Surprise, surprise, looking at phosphate. But again, thoroughly enjoyed that. So I said, well, you know what? The kids are all grown up. The house is there, paid for near enough. I have time now because, I got the hang of managing a golf course. So I had time in the evenings. So I said, I go the whole hog now. And just for a personal challenge, mostly, I went and started on a PhD program. Again, a research program. And basically, at that time, this was, say, 2006, 2007, here in Europe, things were changing regarding regulations, regarding pesticide usage. Fungicide controls were being restricted big time. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. And a guy that used to come into us advising us, Dr. Michael Fox was his name. He said back in the mid 2000s, just before the degree research project, we don't use phosphate, he said. It's a way to reduce disease. Now, I'd never heard of that. No one over in Europe, in Turfgrass, had heard of phosphate in the mid 2000s. It's been used in the States to control things like pythium, all right. But that sort of led on to looking at ways to control disease without having to use fungicides. And the whole area of alternative ways to not only reduce disease, but also improve the quality and health of the turf grasses. So that's I sort of wandered into that about 2008, started into that. I started the interest there and sort of led on from that. And so I got invited to do talks then. I was still working as a greenkeeper. So the very first talk I ever did, now, stop me anytime if I'm talking too much, because
you're doing well.
Irish people do talk a lot. Now, you probably know that. So if you want to stop it at any time, just say something.
I will butt in when I need
just
to,
keep
but you keep carrying on. Absolutely.
So I remember the very first public talk I ever did. It was we produced our thesis for the degree program first, and got invited. Myself and my advisor was Dr. Andy Owen, who's with ICL now in the UK. We were invited to the European Turfgrass Society's conference in France in 2010. Now, that was a big thing. That was the first public talk. I remember getting there, and a lot of these people whose works and books I'd referenced were there. And thought, oh, and there's about, I think, 250, 300 people there. I was slightly nervous doing that one, but I got over it and got used to it after that. But that was the very first one. And it was interesting. Because it was the week. We actually drove there from Ireland. So we drove down, got the ferry to England, just drove down through England, got the Eurotunnel into France, and drove on. Nice trip. And it was very lucky because it was the week the Icelandic volcano erupted, and all the flights in Europe were stopped. And we could just drive home. Everyone else got stuck there.
Well, it sounds like it's almost going to erupt again at some stage soon. I was very fortunate to go to Iceland recently, and not recently, probably 12 months ago now. But there's some guys over there that I suppose they're all about the sustainability, because they've only got a small window of time in relation to what you're doing. And you touched on those early practices before of lots of thatch and not the right top dressing material and all those things. But it becomes that breeding ground for disease, I suppose, within the plant, not providing an option. But there's so many people these days that are looking at a more sustainable way of managing the turf and letting the turf, shine, I suppose, and giving it that opportunity to be the premier playing surface that they can do. So all of these, I suppose, bits of information that one you're sharing and others are out there is really adding to that education and way in which people can find a way to better manage their turf surfaces.
Actually, we were there in Iceland in March, and They brought it on the trip to a golf course. I can't remember the name of it, but it was in a restricted area because the volcanoes were erupting near it. So the whole area was restricted. The golf course was abandoned. Beautiful golf course.
Yeah.
And parts of it had sunk maybe 15, 20 feet just from the tectonic activity in that. But anyway, the whole idea of sort of what I've been hitting on talking about for the last few years is, as you say, sustainability, ensuring your turf grass is in the most healthiest and robust way it can be, so it can respond to any of the stresses, not only infection, which is a biotic stress, but abiotic problems as well. And there's a whole sort of legion of things you can do. And the last resort, really, in my opinion, should be when you have to resort to fungicides, if you have any. Yeah. So, we talk about this disease pyramid, where the level of disease is influenced by 4 factors, actually. Most people use the disease triangle, but I use the pyramid of disease.
Okay, yep.
It's something like an Indiana Jones film, Indiana Jones and the Pyramid of Disease.
You can copyright that one, that'd be great.
I think I will, yeah. But, there's the pathogen which causes the disease, is the turf grass, the plant. Then there's environmental conditions, which are huge. And there's a factor of time. So what I say is, turf managers, you have to try and influence in whatever way you can these 4 factors to try to reduce the disease, but also improve your turf quality. The pathogen, there's not much you can do about it because it's going to be there in the environment. It's going to be attached there in the soil. It's going to be floating around, basically. Now, if you do reduce disease levels over time, the level of the pathogen inoculum is going to be reduced. The plant, you can look at a lot of less susceptible species or cultivars of the grass. You can go down that road. The environment is a huge thing, of course, and this is where the rolling will come in, because it's not only the climatic environment, it's actually the growth environment, how you manage that. And this is the big thing. I just hit on the time factor first. What I'm talking about there is the pathogen needs time to germinate and grow, and the all plants, and they're being infected or being challenged by a pathogen, will respond with some very complex biochemical defense mechanisms. A bit like us, when we're infected, we produce antibodies. So plants, first of all, that they have to recognize there's a problem. And this is where what's called elicitors come in, which recognize the problem, set off the alarm bells, and the defenses kick in then. And plants, they have very rapid responses, first of all, short-term defenses, which tries to contain the infection within that particular site. And things like around the site of infection, the cells are programmed to die, sort of try to starve out the pathogen from moving any further. At the same time, there's a more medium term. There's a whole range of different compounds produced, which are not normally produced. They're what's called secondary metabolites. These are produced during times of problems. And then there's more long-term. Plants produce salicylic acid, which is basically aspirin. So basically, if they get a headache, they produce aspirin. But this salicylic acid is generated and moves to uninfected parts of the plant or other plants, and this kickstarts these defenses again. So the whole idea of one of the things we're looking at is kickstarting these defenses before infection, sort of priming the plants ready, so they're ready. So it's a bit like a vaccine. And there's various things you can look at. I mean, phosphate was one of them. We know that produces these defenses. But people have looked at applying salicylic acid to plants, again, to kickstart the defenses, to things like silica, a whole range of things. And don't worry, I'm leading up to rolling in a minute.
No, you're all good. Absolutely.
But what did I say? Oh, yeah. But, as I said, all these defense processes require resources. So the key thing is you have a balanced nutritional program, not too much, not too little, enough so that the plants have resources to call on. Yeah. And that involves things like, in the autumn or even through summer, that I give an example for anthracnose, for example, which is very much a stress-related disease. research has shown increasing the height of cut slightly is going to reduce the disease. That's giving more leaf area, produce more products for defense as well. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things you can do. Cultural practices now. We're heading into rolling now, so cultural practices, you can do an awful lot there. Now, nothing so far is going to sort of completely stop the disease. It's only when you start combining all these bits and pieces together, good nutritional program, the use of defense activators, like I mentioned, like phosphate, and then there's cultural practices. So a lot of research there. For example, I mentioned anthracnose. So that's a very there's a lot of anthracnose in Australia, I'd say, is there at times.
Yeah.
So, a lot of research in Rutgers University. So they found that, as I say, increasing the height of cut slightly, like from 2.8 to 3.6 mil. So increasing it a fraction. Regular light top dressing. How does that help? Well, it reduces anthracnose, which is, as I say, stress related, because the light top dressing is actually helping to protect the crowns of the turf grass. Proper use of water, irrigation, getting the right amount, and then rolling. Oh, yes. But no, rolling, I've done a lot of reading up on it over the anytime I'm doing a talk on alternative ways to control disease, rolling has been there now for years. So I start, first of all, is a friend of mine, Dr. Clint Mattox. Have you heard of Clint?
Yep, I've heard of him.
That's good. He was in Oregon State University on the West Coast, which has similar climate to us in Ireland and the UK, because they get all the moisture coming in from the Pacific. So it's ideal for microdochium, or fusarium patch disease. Again, pink snow mole under snow cover. So he was looking at ways, again, for alternative ways to reduce disease without having to resort to fungicides. And he looked at quite a few things, but he always had a section in where he rolled or not rolled. And you see things like where he used potassium phosphate or sulfur, and they got a good reduction. But at the same time, he had potassium phosphate and sulfur rolled and not rolled. And he also had rolled and not rolled on its own, and there's always a significant reduction in microdochium from rolling. Likewise, sticking with microdochium in Denmark, which is very highly restricted, with lack of fungicides available there. Martin Nielsen in Copenhagen Golf Club. He has done some research. Do you know Martin?
I've seen him on social media, absolutely, and had the pleasure of playing at the golf course before. And it's great.
Yeah, nice place, Copenhagen, actually. Anyway, so he did some work as well along with Sturf. Again, they got a reduction in microdochium just by rolling. They rolling twice a week. I think it was twice a week only from end of August on. Got a nice reduction in microdochium just by that. Dollar spot, that's a huge problem in Australia, I reckon.
Yes, absolutely.
Temperatures, not so much here in Ireland, but it actually is on the increase now. In all the years I've been at the Curragh, we never had dollar spot, so we didn't have the climate for it.
Yes.
Likewise with Pythium, a huge problem in the States, but no, not here. But the dollar spot, again, it's the most damaging disease in like the US. I'm not sure about Australia, but I'm sure it's devastating too.
That's prevalent. That's for sure. Yep.
Yeah, but again, who did the research there? Chap I know as well gave me some T-shirts a few years ago. I can't think of his name offhand, but research rolling definitely reduced dollar spot as well. A friend of mine here in Dublin on a very fine links course, where dollar spot is on the increase in links courses at the moment in Ireland, mostly because they're drier and they have lower fertility. But the only way he controls dollar spot at the moment is by rolling. That's all he does now in the surrounds of the greens and that. But again, rolling dollar spot, very good. And I mentioned anthracnose. This is from Rutgers University in the US, New Jersey. if you want to know about anthracnose control, just go to their site, because they've done a huge amount. But rolling again, now so they do a lot of talks, and I talk about rolling and the slideshow. At this stage, people put their hands up and say, so how does it work? And usually my next slide is, how does it work?
Yeah. Timed it perfectly.
Yeah. So, but like, there's no definitive answer to that. There's a few things. Now, I personally think that rolling is causing a slight defense response. It's slightly stressing the plant, and the plant is responding with these defense compounds I mentioned earlier on. I think that I remember years ago, I think it was actually Dr. Michael Fox said it to me, that in Japan they were using feathers. Now, not to do with turfgrass. Don't worry, no, lads, don't get your ostrich feathers out or whatever you have over there, emus or whatever.
Emus over here. That's right.
They were using, as an experiment, they were using feathers to lightly stroke plants, and it garnered a response in the plant. So
yeah, right.
Maybe we should do it. Maybe we should get a few feathers.
Yeah, give it a test. That could be the next test plot.
Well, so I think rolling will initiate a defense response. And you might ask then, well, if that's the case, why isn't mowing doing the same? Because, you're rolling as well when you're cutting. So when you're cutting, though, you're actually damaging the plant, of course. You're taking grass away. So the plant's going to respond to that. Physical. It's like when it's being grazed by sheep, or a plant's being ate by an insect, that garners a response as well. So that takes compounds to repair that and defend itself, and also send out a signal. The smell of grass being cut is actually a defense call to other plants. That's what that is. Okay. Yeah. Which is an interesting one, where some plants, when they're being chewed on by an insect, will send out this smell, and it attracts these predatory insects that will attack the insect that's chewing the plant. So I say it's amazing what goes on.
Mother Nature is an amazing thing. That is for sure. That is for sure.
But I think rolling is inducing a response, and certainly if you're increasing the height of cut slightly, like with anthracnose, or even the autumn winter, certainly once you get to, say, September, you're increasing the leaf area, you're increasing photosynthetic activity and production of compounds for the plant, so it has a reserve to call on. So increasing the height of cut, people would say, well, that's not going to slow down the greens and that. But if you combine it with regular rolling, you offset that. So you get
that's right.
Yeah,
you're looking at creating that smooth and true environment versus,
that's the main reason.
And I think, correct. And that obviously then. And we have a number of people now talking about replacing a mow with a roll, but still being able to achieve the same conditions by having a healthier plant. And I know Dr. Tom talked about it when we were talking as well about, you've got good and bad bacteria within the plant or the grass surface, and rolling is certainly helping promote that good bacteria, which is then fighting against the bad stuff that's in the soil.
I'm coming to that.
Good. Oh, excellent.
So that's one way that rolling, but another way is, and it's been researched, rolling will slightly increase the soil moisture levels in the upper inch and a half. That's been shown. Now, people might say, well, we don't want wet. Now, we're talking about slight increase going, say, from 20% volumetric water to maybe 22, 23. But basically it's increasing what's called the wettability of the rhizosphere. That sounds great, doesn't it?
It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel.
I practice these terms, so I look like a scientist.
Well, you've got me convinced, John. You've got me convinced.
Well, I say that because the last 5 years now, I've been, as an independent researcher, I take on various projects from various companies. So I've been looking at surfactants and how they work, and we have a paper in to be published in the International Turfgrass Society looking at how the use of surfactants during wet conditions. Now, we've had a lot of wet summers the last few years, but surfactants during wet conditions, when normally you would think, what's the point in using them? But we're seeing a significant increase in turfgrass quality. and health. And what's
Mhm.
happening is, and there's work done with other plant systems, surfactants are increasing the wettability of the rhizosphere.
Yeah.
So basically, the rhizosphere is the interaction between the plant roots and the soil, where basically this is where all the business goes on. They take up all the nutrients via this. So increasing that sort of moisture level and making a consistent level of moisture, there is increased enzymatic activity. So enzymes which help to the whole metabolic process are increased. There's increased microbial activity, which is what you mentioned there with Tom.
Mm.
And there's a very significant increase in take up of the nutrients that are there. So the nutrients are in there, and because there's a more consistent level of moisture, a whole range of nutrients are taken up more efficiently. So the plant's healthier and has better resources to call on. The microbial activity, as you just said, and bacterial populations, there's more competition. So
Yes.
the bad guys are sort of edged out a bit. So that's another thing there now that happens with rolling. So like as you delve into these things with plants and soil, there's so much interactions and things going on. And
Mm.
when I finished my degree, before I started the PhD, I thought I knew everything. Oh my God.
It all opened up from there.
Oh yeah. So the more you look into these things, the more you realize you haven't, you don't know what's going on half the time. Yeah.
So you must have a fairly inquisitive nature then, as you say. You think you've learned everything, but then you've kept going and continue to learn more. And it's amazing in this industry how much information there is out there that you can consume and delve into. So you must have a very inquisitive mind, anyway.
Are you calling me nosy?
No, inquisitive.
Well, you have to, yeah. But look, everyone is inquisitive, really. Well, most people would be, and I find it fascinating that you can get caught very much in a rabbit hole, though, if you start going down. You have to. I think going through a PhD in one thing apart from studying a particular subject, what you do learn is how to control and how to focus on certain areas. Because as you go down the path, what you want to study, there's a whole range of offshoots which could distract you. So you have to sort of focus and stay focused on what your aim is. So yeah, but there's a lot of information there, huge, too much nearly. There's so much out there. So you have to be able to focus on what you want to find out and then sort of interpret it and in some cases then present it in a way that people can understand. As Einstein said, what did he say? If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it enough. So I always like to talk, apart from throwing in things like the wettability of the rhizosphere, I like to talk in a normal way, sort of.
Because we're now talking as well, really beyond just greens grass, the green complex, because the way that the turf is now presented around a golf course, and this is something we touched on with Tom as well, is that the height of cut on fairways and tees and all around the golf courses are needing to look at these practices now of sustainability to ensure that you've got a consistent playing surface from tee to green effectively.
That's it, yeah. And things have changed, all right. I know when I started now, we had it actually, it was fairly consistent because it was actually sheep grazing the golf course. So we had a fairway, sort of, just barely make it out. There was less daisies on it. But that was truly natural golf because I mentioned to you before we started that the Royal Curragh is the oldest golf course in Ireland, and basically the Curragh itself is an open grassland and has never been cultivated since Neolithic times. And when I was there, if you had any groundwork to do or anything, we always had to have an archaeologist on site because there's all so much underneath. You don't know what's underneath there. But what happened was this big, I say big grassland. And obviously for Australia, it's probably just the size of someone's backyard. But there's this big open grassland, right? And in the 1850s, the British Army they established a camp there for their cavalry, and They brought in some Scottish regiments who saw this open grassland, tightly grazed by sheep. And what do? Put a golf course in it. That was
a golf course,
1852.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that was natural. I mean, that's how golf sort of evolved back in Scotland from the links areas, which were basically land that wasn't much good for anything else. It was pretty low in nutrients and that. So the Curragh is unique. It had this fine, tight grass sward, ideal for golf, and it wasn't designed. It just evolved. Yeah. And then so when the sheep went off, then we had to scratch our heads and we had to run around. We had to buy equipment to cut the rough, which we never had before. But golf courses in the 1990s, there's a huge explosion, and a lot of American-style golf courses came in with their shaped fairways, the semi-roughs, the roughs, and bunkers all over the place. And you have to think maybe it should be a more natural. I mean, down where my daughter lives in County Clare now, is near what's called the Hinch Golf Club. Again, totally natural and probably one of the finest in the world. But so you have to think about these things. And as you say, from a sustainability point of view, the amount of work it takes to, machinery to present these all the time. So maybe we should start looking around again and start rethinking. Now, I know a lot of... Go ahead.
Few extra sheep to come into back into course maintenance.
That was my first job on a golf course, right? And I said my father-in-law was there, and my very first job on a golf course was brought in for Open Week, was the big week of the year, and I was given a shovel. And did I say more?
No, you were picking up the natural fertilizer for the rest of the week. I was
picking up what the sheep were eating, after it's being processed. That was my first job. Actually, I was talking, Frank Rossi. Frank.
I'm not sure. I've heard the name, but not sure.
Yeah, doing a thing with him last year, and I was saying that my first job was basically picking up shit after the sheep. Yeah. And I've been shoveling shit ever since, I said.
But now in a more sustainable and scientific way.
Yes, at least I know what's in it.
Yeah, exactly right. So if you were to give the superintendents of today a couple of tips in relation to how they can sustainably manage their course, especially when you're looking at this disease prevention, as you touched on before, the anthracnose and all those sort of things, what would be a couple of tips you'd give them in relation to managing their facilities?
Well, first of all, I'd say get to know your enemy. So no matter where you are in the world, get to know what diseases you're dealing with. Now over here, basically we only have microdocium, anthracnose, and maybe red thread. So, but in parts of Australia and the States, with the different climates, you have a whole range of different diseases. So look at what they like. Do they like? One big thing that most pathogens do enjoy is leaf wetness. Long periods of leaf wetness, dewy country. So that's a huge thing there. And again, if you're rolling, knocking the dew down, that's going to be a help. But know your enemy. Look at your grass species, see what do they like. Again, I'd say it's all about a balance. Try to maintain your turf with at least the least amount of inputs as possible, while retaining enough vigor that they can defend themselves. A bit like us, if you're underfed or if you're overfed, you have problems. So get the balance right. And also, I would say to superintendents, especially young guys coming in, get your life balance right as well, because a huge amount of guys I know, and myself included, would spend their working days 24/7 thinking and working on the golf course. And, you have to think of other things. It's just a job, right? I know it's a lovely job, but your life and your family are more important. I know when I finished in 20, you can never enjoy a good summer. You're always worrying if the place dry, or winter. Okay, we frost. Golfers are ringing, can we go out? No, we shouldn't have gone out. Blah, blah. There's always something. So it's a 24/7 job, no doubt.
It is, and balance, and we've been talking here internally and about sustainability, and what we're doing is talking about sustainability of the grass. But what we're talking also about is another pillar, which is the sustainability of those that are working within the turf space. Yes. And we've got another super series coming up soon with a gentleman from Pebble Beach who's been, and we'll be putting an article in Greenkeeping magazine as well around this, around the sustainability of the person and how you can just make sure, because yes, long summers or cold winters, there is a lot of stress that can be put on the workers out there actually doing the job, yes. Let alone what members or golfers think about the presentation of the course. And what we are very fortunate to have in this industry is people with passion, but we need to be able to make sure that that passion is channeled in the right way so they don't burn out and get cast on the heap, so to speak, and feel like a closely mown blade of grass, very stressed. So yes. That I think that's very important. Not alone I like that to know your enemy, and then know your enemy around the stuff that's hurting the plant, but know your own enemies as well, and what could be potentially keeping you from having a very good and fulfilling life in turf. That's very important.
And yourself could be your own worst enemy because you push yourself so hard.
Correct.
No doubt about it. I know when I finished now in 2019 on the golf course, it was in June, and we had on the Curragh it was, and there's a big competition week coming up that following Saturday. I finished on the Tuesday, and I woke up and it was absolutely teeming rain, and I thought, well, you know what, it's not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
And I had actually a fantastic summer, and it's only then that you realize that the amount of stress, and you're constantly thinking about the job. So that's a huge thing. Paul McCormick now from Canada is the big guy into this. Very you should get him on if you want to talk about stress and mindfulness. No doubt about
absolutely. We've got a natural organism out there that we're working with, but we've got a human-centric approach to what we need to be doing as well. So it's balance is the key. Whichever way we want to talk about it, making sure we've got a balanced approach to turf management and ourselves as well. Well, Dr. John, we might call it. I've taken up plenty of time already. And
before you go, I meant to say, I want to get this in. Like, guys work so hard and they're flat out like a lizard drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be able to make you an honorary Australian. Absolutely. So, well, there's plenty of us down here. I think I've got a bit of Irish heritage myself, going back to probably the convicts, back in the day. But John, we really appreciate the work that you're doing and having that conversation. And especially if you haven't followed, we'll put your Twitter handle up on the podcast as well. But there's a lot of great information that you're sharing out there. And if you do get the chance to see Dr. John in person or on another speaking engagement, wherever it is in the world, I certainly recommend that you do that. So, John, once again, thanks for being part of the Super Series and imparting some of your knowledge with us.
I know, it's my pleasure. I'll go and have a cup of tea now for the morning.
Good to hear.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, mate.